Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with whole chicken pie. That's right, this thing came out looking so stunning and so beautiful. I would have been thrilled if the chicken underneath just came out okay. But not only was the outside gorgeous, but inside the flavor and texture were as well. So to summarize, I loved everything about this. And we'll begin this showstopper by prepping a very simple vegetable stuffing for the bird, which will include some diced mirepoix, which is just a fancy French culinary term for onions, celery, and carrots. And then we'll also toss in some sliced garlic, as well as some freshly chopped rosemary, or of course any other herb of your choice. And then we'll go ahead and season this up with some kosher salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper, and the obligatory little shake of cayenne. And then last but not least, we will add a little drizzle of olive oil, and we'll take a spoon and give this a mix. And hopefully what this mixture is going to do is flavor and perfume our bird from the inside out. Plus, as you'll see, we're going to use some of that in our sauce when we finish the plate. But anyway, we'll go ahead and give that a mix, and then set it aside while we move on to prep our chicken, if you can even call it that. And what you're going to need here is one whole chicken with no guts inside. And if you want the same times I'm giving in this video to work for you, you'll want to get one between 3 1/4 and 3.5 pounds. And as far as trimming goes, I did cut the little flat part of the wings off because I think that's going to make this easier to wrap. So I did remove half the wing. And then besides that, the only other thing we're going to have to do here is generously salt this inside and out. And I do mean generous. All right, we want that cavity salted as well as the entire surface of the bird, which is why I sprinkled more salt on the sides after I turned off the camera. And then once successfully seasoned, we'll go ahead and spoon our aromatic vegetables into the cavity. And since I was just guessing at the amounts, I only ended up needing about half of what I made. Which, by the way, actually worked out perfectly, since of course we're going to make a stock with the leftover bones and scraps. And what do you need for stock? Some mirepoix. So if you have any extra, make sure you save it. And then the last thing we need to do here once our chicken's been vegetabled is go ahead and tie the legs together. And that chicken has now been officially prepped. And at this point we can go ahead and transfer that into the fridge until it's ready to wrap. And by the way, feel free to do this step hours ahead of time. All right, not only isn't it a problem, it's probably even better. But anyway, once our chicken's prepped and in the fridge, we can move on to rolling out our dough, which for me is exactly one batch of our buttercrust pastry. And what we'll do on a very generously floured surface is go ahead and roll that out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. And again, please be sure you're using enough flour so this does not stick to your surface, since that is one of the few things that can screw this up. And then what we'll do once that's been rolled out to a nice big circle, like I said, about 1/8 of an inch thick, we will carefully transfer our chicken on breast side down. And yes, those are some paper towels you see on the edge of the frame, which I use to pat off some of the moisture. We don't want a lot of moisture on the dough. But anyway, I placed that breast side down right in the center. And then I started gathering the dough up to see if I had enough to cover. Which of course, to make the video more exciting, I did not. But that's fine, because now I can show you basically the worst case scenario. So once I saw what I was dealing with, I simply cut the excess dough from where I saw there was too much. And what I'll do is just sort of piece those onto the back. And that should, and as you'll see did, solve the problem. And since we're going to egg wash this before it goes in the oven anyway, I figured I would use some of that here to help things stick. And I brushed some of that on my patches, and also a little bit on the parts that overlap. And then I proceeded to go around, pressing everything together, using a little bit of that egg wash when and if necessary. And you really should keep two things in mind as you do this. One is that pie dough is very, very easy to patch together. And that's because as that butter kind of warms up, the dough is almost going to take on a clay-like texture, meaning it's very easy to sort of push and press and smear it together. And as we go, anytime we see a little extra piece of dough, we can cut that off or pull it off in case we need it later. So that's what I did. I went around patching and pressing, pushing and smearing those seams together. But be careful when you're trying to fix a bare spot that you don't pull and stretch that dough too thin. All right, what is probably a better idea is to take a piece of extra dough and just open that up and work that in and then repatch. And that's going to work out a lot better. Oh, and the other thing to remember is, once we turn this over and bake it, it's going to look incredibly beautiful. And we are not going to see any of that patchwork underneath. And then what we'll do once we think this is successfully wrapped is very carefully but confidently flip it over and then very, very gently press on the inside of both legs so as to achieve some kind of chicken leg shape. And that's it. We'll go ahead and transfer that into a lined baking sheet. And I guess you could bake this right away, but I highly recommend we pop that in the fridge for about 30 minutes so the crust is nice and cold when it goes in the oven. And I forget exactly why, since culinary school was like 35 years ago. Which, by the way, was probably the last time I wrapped a chicken in pastry. But anyway, I do like to pop it in the fridge for about a half hour, at which point we can pull it out. And before we pop it in the oven, we're going to give it a nice brushing of egg wash, which, as you know, is just 1 egg beaten with a couple teaspoons of water. And we'll go ahead and brush that all over, making sure we're getting the entire surface, even all the way underneath. And then once that's set, one optional step would be to sprinkle this with extra coarse sea salt, which I'm going to do using the world-famous fleur de sel. And by the way, I only want you doing this step if you have coarse salt. All right, fine table salt's going to disappear, and it's going to make it too salty. But if you do have the coarse stuff, go ahead and sprinkle a little bit over. And that's it. Once our whole chicken pie has been egg washed and salted, we'll go ahead and pop that into the center of a 400-degree oven for exactly 1 hour and 10 minutes. And please, no peeking. It might throw off the time. And after 1 hour and 10 minutes, if everything's gone according to plan, your whole chicken pie should look like this. In other words, it should look like one of the best things you've ever seen. And as much as I'd like to tell you it's ready to eat right now, it's not, since you have to let this sit at least a minimum of 30 minutes before you cut in. And if you want, you can even go longer. Right? The word on the street is you can go as long as 60 minutes. Oh, and as usual, if you have any accumulated juices on your pan, save those. We can actually pour those in the sauce later. And while I was waiting, I did a couple things. One was to transfer it into this pie dish for a hopefully provocative presentation. And I went ahead and garnished with a little bit of fresh rosemary. And the other thing I did while I was resting is cut a little piece of crust off the back so I could steal some of those aromatic vegetables for my sauce. Oh, and if you're wondering if the pastry gets nice and crispy, check it out. Knife, don't lie. So yes, that does sound incredible. Oh, and don't throw away that piece. We're going to put it back. But anyway, we'll transfer some of those vegetables into this pan, along with a little bit of butter. And we'll place that over medium-high heat with a pinch of salt. And we'll want to cook those vegetables in this butter until they're just tender, which, depending on how small you cut these, isn't going to take long. In fact, they might have come out of the chicken tender. But you'll know, because you'll check. And then what we'll do once we think our vegetables are tender enough is add in a splash of wine. And I'm using a French rosé because I'm trendy. And if you did have any accumulated juices from your sheet pan, go ahead and dump those in also. And then once our liquids are in, we'll be using standard Food Wishes pan sauce procedure, which means we're going to reduce that liquid down by about half, throw in a chunk of butter, stir it around until it disappears, season, and eat. So that's what I'm doing here. Again, we simply reduce by about half, toss in a cold chunk of butter, turn off the heat, and then just keep moving the pan or stir in the butter with a spoon or both until it disappears. And other than giving it a quick taste for seasoning, that sauce is done. And once that's set, we'll go ahead and pull that off the heat and slice up a portion of chicken. And we'll go ahead and plate that up and spoon around some of our sauce. Which, by the way, I should mention, you could add a splash of cream to maybe mimic something a little closer in flavor profile to a chicken pot pie. That would not be a bad idea. So by all means, feel free to tweak this sauce. I mean, you are, after all, the Elon Musk of your chicken undercrust. And speaking of innovations, you can also put some chopped herb in the crust itself, which may or may not make it better. I guess it depends on who you talk to. But anyway, we'll sauce that up, and that's it. Our whole chicken pie is ready to enjoy. And you know what? I should just start serving this stuff by itself. That undressed salad is not fooling anybody. But I'm sorry, I was so distracted by the beauty of this chicken, I could not wait to grab a fork and knife and dig in. And unlike other dough-wrapped chicken recipes that use things like brioche or puff pastry, here you don't have to pull off a bunch of flabby skin. Because of the butter content in the pie crust and because it's so thin, that stuff gets really hot and it actually sort of fries the chicken skin underneath. And not fry it crispy, but cook it enough where a lot of that fat renders out and the skin actually becomes edible if we so choose. So I really was blown away by the texture here. And not just by the crust, but by the delicious meat as well. Okay, because that buttery pastry protected our poultry, it stayed nice and juicy and moist. And those rosemary and garlic scented aromatic vegetables really perfumed the chicken beautifully. So I really did love everything about this. In fact, this whole chicken pie was so good, I think I could have eaten 3.14 of them. So if you're looking to turn that boring old whole roast chicken into a total showstopper that will have your guests literally applauding as you place this on the table. And of course, your results may vary. But if you did want to take your whole roast chicken game up to another level, then I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.